Aloha, everyone, and welcome to another edition of From Anxiety to Clarity. I'm Beth-Ann Kozlovich from Sutter Health Kahi Mohala, and this is a project of both Kahi Mohala and our friends at Brain Gain Hawaii, namely the Leong family. And we're really glad to be able to have conversations, as we've been doing for these last 20 weeks or so, about how we're all coping with COVID-19 in our lives and how it's ever changing and what changes may come as we move through this time into whatever is next. It's been a difficult time for many, many people, continues to be a difficult time, and we're hoping that these conversations are helping just a little. So where are we now? Well, we're approaching mid-September. We are in a time of shutdown for Oahu for many, many things, with the exception of beaches and parks and trails if you walk alone. But if you don't, you could be in trouble. We also found out this weekend that our Lieutenant Governor, Josh Green, is also COVID positive, as is someone in his office. And we're waiting to find out about how more people in that office may be affected, as we're seeing many, many more people affected within Hawaii. And we have a great deal of cases that keep coming up still in the triple digits every single day. Most of this week, that's where we were at. So there's plenty to be anxious about, but there's also joy to be found in the world. And there are also those small moments that happen as we're all inside. And as we look at the world outside, taking different perspectives, today we're going to talk with Captain, very, very soon to be Major Mike Lambert of HPD. He has been really the driving force behind the programs that help homeless people, unsheltered people, people dealing with mental illness. A few years ago, the Mental Health America of Hawaii chapter gave him an award, well-deserved, for all of his efforts, namely for Honu, for the homeless outreach and navigation, for unsheltered persons. I hope I've got that right, Mike. And oh, that works. And recently, for POST, the provisional outdoor screening and triage, which has been a real boon for those who are unsheltered and who are also needing to have a place to be in this time of COVID. So with that, I want to welcome Captain, I really want to say Major because it's only going to be another week or so. So I'm going to say Major Mike Lambert to From Anxiety to Clarity. Hi there.
Hi, Beth. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you taking the time to hear what I have to say.
Well, I appreciate you for everything that you've been doing, which has been considerable. And I wanted to ask you this. I know I never got a chance to ask you when we were at the Mental Health America of Hawaii meeting where we were big luncheon where we gave you the award a few years ago. And full disclosure, I'm on their board. But what led you to want to do this kind of work? What was that lens that you were looking through as an HPD officer now of what, 17 going on 18 years, where this would be something that really touched your heart?
Right. So great question, Beth. So it's one of those, what makes someone come out of their lane? What makes somebody decide that we need to do more as a profession, as an agency? So what happened is that it was actually born out of enforcement. The sit-lie had just started, and they're kind of going in that direction. Law enforcement, we always say, okay, that's our tool. Our tool are utilizing laws. So what we did was we actually did a huge enforcement operation. We spent a lot of taxpayer dollars to do it. And we were actually effective in clearing out Chinatown utilizing sit-lie, only to see that we negatively impacted Evil A, right? Because these people don't disappear. They need to go somewhere.
They move.
They move, exactly. So, we celebrated for all of 10 days for Chinatown, while Evil A essentially were over on the individuals. As you guys probably track that legislation or that revised ordinances, then Evil A followed and other areas followed, and the problem just dispersed right back into Chinatown. So the commander at the time and myself just said, we gotta figure out something else. It's the equivalent of smashing your foot down in the middle of a puddle, and yeah, the water will move away for a very short time, but as soon as you lift your foot, it comes right back. So the trick is to really, instead of just trying to move it around the problem, the issue, why don't we try to pick people up and try to get them into services? So what we started to do from that time on is it was documented that I reached out to officer that actually left the police department to open his own nonprofit, Alea Bridge. Joe Acosta to see, what is it that we're doing wrong, right? What is it that we're not
Mm.
And of course, I got an earful. You know, I definitely got an earful.
I can
And
imagine.
so I called a meeting with a lot of other providers. And I always kind of laugh because it was like, is it a trick? So we had Kali Palama, IHS, Alea, of course, H3RC, which was Child Project at the time. And we invited them and we said, to this meeting, and everybody was very skeptical about who is this Mike Lambert guy and what does he want to talk about? And it basically started there where I said, HPD wants to improve in the way that we're dealing with the mental illness issue, in the way that we're treating homeless individuals, because we recognize that enforcement alone is not going to solve the problem. And in fact, throughout time, we've recognized through working with providers and seeing firsthand that there are times where enforcement may not be appropriate and outreach may be more beneficial.
From that time to now, how has this been moving through HPD, and what kind of reception are you getting, with officers? Because we do hear about such mixed reactions when officers come to the door and what people say they are experiencing. It can be good, it can be not so good. It can be very understanding, or it can be not understanding at all and sort of fobbing it off and just saying, oh, let them sleep it off, or you two patch it up, or whatever it may be. Or just with people who are homeless, skirting the issue and not taking the kind of care that you would like to see offered.
Right, so that's a challenge, especially in law enforcement, because there's so much subjectivity in how the officer will apply the law and what resources are available to them. I will say that initially in 2017, when these initiatives began, there's a lot of skepticism in regards to why are we doing this? Isn't that somebody else's job? Right, and I was able to find a small group of officers that were like-minded and really took hold. And what I think that people find interesting is that later on down the road, I kind of asked, right, what led you to coming to help me with my initiative? And they actually said that they experienced homelessness as a child. And I was a little blown away. And I was like, well, okay. And, they said that I have one officer that said they lived on the beach for 3 years as a child, and only in retrospect did he realize that they were homeless, because you're young, you're out there, you just figure you're camping indefinitely. And to find out, I was blown away. And another one of my officers was in and out of foster care as a child. The mother, unfortunately, had some substance abuse issues. So they're very, very sympathetic. And it kind of opened my eyes to what I tell the community is that your police department is a reflection of the community. The officers that staff our positions are no different than anyone else. It's just a profession that we chose, and we have all the same challenges that everyone else has. So fast forward, right? I got a small cadre of officers. We showed a lot of great progress. I think in 2018, we helped about 170 people off the street. In 2019, we helped about 260 people move from the street to shelter. And as it starts to kind of snowball and officers begin to say, wow, that actually works. It actually works. If you offer them the service, right, in lieu of enforcement, and if you make sure that you're appropriate in how you do enforcement, making sure that there's always that outreach leg, that you can actually solve the problem. And I think that one of the biggest issues officers have, or the community has with us, is the fact that we're just problem solvers. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to solve the problem with whatever's available to us. So at the time prior to our programs, basically it's an arrest, right? That's, you're complaining about the male on the sidewalk, we arrest them, we've solved the problem, so to speak, right? But what we noticed down the road is that you really haven't, because it's a very minor offense and the person will be out at 8 a.m. only to have the same issue. The long-term bang for your buck is to offer that person shelter, offer that person services, and then not have them return to the street, right? That now you've actually solved the problem. So
that's the best scenario, right?
Yeah, that's the best case scenario.
Right. But what I hear you saying is just looking at this from how do we stop the endless revolving door, which doesn't seem to do anything more than simply perpetuate itself.
Exactly.
And as they say, nothing perpetuates success like success. So now that you've had these couple of years of success with the programs that you've started and the initiative with the cadre of officers who believed in you and continued on with you. Here we are in 2020 dealing with a very different situation that has people not just looking at homeless folks and people with mental illness who are on the streets in the way that they might have in past, but now they're also looking at them as being potential vectors of a dangerous disease. You stood up the POST program, and I mean, looking at how well and efficiently that happened, what do you think we need to do from this point on, as we're still continuing with surge and we see these numbers increasing, and hoped that we would be in a better place, but we aren't? How do you see this rolling out further to be able to get more of your HPD, I was going to say brethren, but that doesn't take into account the women who are also on the force, but everybody, all police officers, to be able to understand the things that you already do, now layered on with COVID-19?
Right, so it has stacked on an additional challenge. And just like, it's unfortunate, even prior to COVID, our homeless community, they typically become demonized for every problem, right? They're the ones with the drug, they're the ones stealing, they're the ones, robbing, and not necessarily is that true. Same thing fast forward into COVID, where, they're the ones spreading COVID. And what we found locally is that that's actually not true. We actually have a very small rate of positives, because a lot of times these people, due to their mental illness or physical appearance, people don't come within 6 feet of them for 15 minutes. And that ability to transmit is low, but there is a huge fear within our encampments that our homeless individuals that are a little more social could create a wildfire effect in an encampment of 15 to 20 people, and then the fear is that they'll go ahead and walk around town. So the challenges that the officers are seeing out there is that there's a lot of negativity towards the homeless community, and they're calling, people call in and the homeless are doing this and doing that, not realizing that majority of the violators in regards to COVID response are actually residents. And we've seen I think I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's generally residents that are spreading it amongst each other at parties and other events. I will add that in regards to the earlier question, in regards to officers taking it, is that COVID has actually created a silver lining in regards to social services, because my projects were predominantly smaller projects, and I would work in these little 3-4 officer kind of groups. And because the post became such a huge success, and in fact, as we speak, there's over 70 individuals in there now receiving shelter services that would have otherwise been in a park or some other inappropriate environment. So because it's such a large operation, now we have anywhere from 5 to 6 officers out there every day, just cycling 24 hours a day. And all of these officers that would have never been exposed to the programs that we have, right, working in their little areas, are now saying, wow, these people are hurting, right? There's 70 people, 20 people in their security site, and these people are talking to them and getting to know them. And then I really believe that the silver lining is that these officers are understanding that there's a lot of good people that are experiencing homelessness right now. And I believe that will transcend, outside of COVID.
I mean, the group that you're talking about that's cycling in and creating security in post, these are officers who weren't necessarily part of your initial cadre of officers. This is expanded to everybody, where they're actually put on duty there for a certain period of time, and then others come in. So what you're really doing is exposing them to something that they might never have really been exposed to themselves. And we don't mean COVID-19.
Not COVID-19.
Not COVID-19, but a way of approaching and sort of a bridge to accessing these people and seeing them as people in trouble who need their help.
I will say this: we have some officers that were very stiff, I would say, very letter of the law on our homeless community prior to this event. And they're very, very strict. No, they need to follow the law. They need to do this. Everybody else does. And they worked at the post a couple of times, and they really changed the way that they look at the crisis, the homeless crisis. And I've seen guys that I would never believe, buying guys shoes, bringing, donating their personal clothes, just amazing things that I don't think that it had COVID not ran its course and us not having to create this large environment that the officers would have had that ability to change the way they think. So I'm
Yeah.
in a way, I know it sounds weird, but COVID has provided some benefit in regards to officers and social services.
Well, in many ways, I think we're seeing some silver linings, not to say that it justifies the deaths and the horrific conditions that people have had to go through in not being able to say goodbye to loved ones who were passing, or to be able to visit loved ones in nursing homes. But if there is anything good that has truly been coming out of it, I think those attitudinal shifts about homelessness and about mental health are certainly chief among them. So at this point, where we're coming into mid-September, we're all in, at least on Oahu, in a phase of lockdown. How do you think this is working? Do you think that this is truly beneficial, the way all of this has been happening? With, you can go out to the park, but it's a solo effort. You can't be with your kids. The LG has been very vocally against this, saying that this doesn't make sense and it's not based in science. Do you think that we lost some of the science to make it a little easier for HPD to see that bright line, as the mayor keeps calling it?
Right. So it's challenging and it's difficult. So I want to, go ahead and give credit where credit is due. The governor and the mayor, the challenges that they're facing in regards to balancing economy, balancing what residents and voters want versus what is probably good for us is a huge, huge challenge. I see the feeling and the sense of the news, how the news reports and what their sentiment is in regards to the latest orders, and it is challenging. And like I said, personally, and it's not the view of the department, there are some things that kind of raise some concerns for me in regards to what is the overall strategy. And I think what happens sometimes is that there's so much pressure from so many different angles that it spoils the soup, so to speak, because in my opinion, the cleanest order was the strictest order in the very beginning. But like, again, and this is my personal opinion, is that if I was a small business owner, I would be very frustrated right now, seeing that if I walk into a Sam's Club, or I don't know if I'm allowed to use names, or let's just say big box. Or any
You can
big
say whatever you like. We're having a chat from my living room to your office at home.
Thanks. Any big box store, and seeing that there's hundreds and hundreds of people shopping there, and then to say that it's any less safe than coming into my crack siege store or my little family restaurant with 4 people, I can see that being very frustrating. Again, that's my own personal opinion. And like I said, like, what I will say is that I do believe that does create frustration in regards to any time general logic is challenged. So that goes for any law, right? So any law or any order, anytime that the community at large feels that there's a challenge in regards to the overall logic of it, I do believe that creates a lot of frustration.
So Mike, I wanted to ask you, in the world according to you, let's say we come to September 23rd and we see that we're still seeing some pretty large numbers there. What do you think should happen then from your view?
Right. So from my view, I do believe that we have to try to figure out a way to not, or to be more fair, rather. So whether or not we lock down or open up, I'm fine with either. If we do open up, I think that there should be a lot of restrictions in regards to capacity of locations. I do personally believe that we should try to utilize, mandatory mask wearing. The science, we have to really listen to doctors. I think that what we're not doing right now, in my opinion, is really listening to the medical profession. We're really, we're letting businesses drive, we're letting the general community's frustration drive the decisions. And I personally believe that the medical professions, we should be looking at them and saying, you infectious disease experts and epidemiologists and all of your great experience and knowledge, what do you believe the law should be in regards to mitigating community spread? And I think I'm not too sure if there's a lot of that voice in the current restrictions.
With the kerfuffles, I'll call them that, at the Department of Health and the change of leadership soon to happen, as Bruce Anderson will be retiring. Sarah Park is on leave. We know that Libby Char is now going to be running the department. Do you see this as being the most opportune time for that kind of leadership that you've just talked about, and that perspective to be more greatly out in the public sphere?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not too sure what the new direction will be. Like I said, I don't think that anyone could have anticipated this type of challenge. And, you know, you can't really dog anyone for being able to step up to this insurmountable task, as it seems, right? When we look back, we'll be able to say, oh, maybe this and that. But as you kind of the tip of the spear and trying to break through this issue, it's really hard to say, you know, if you know, if this then that scenario with the leadership change. I do hope that moving forward, they will start to leverage more of the medical community's viewpoint in providing a strategy. Because, like I said, I think right now, personally, in my view of watching it, it really feels like it's a lot of economical uh, driven in regards to how do I satisfy the business community and our tourism and our current economical state, a state of economy, sorry, versus, you know, let's look at this as a medical pandemic and have the doctors provide a little more guidance.
I want to talk to you a little bit about another aspect of mental health. You know, we have a lot of people who are spending a great deal of time indoors. And for some people, that is exacerbating conditions they may already have, or it may have brought some other conditions to the fore, or they just may be people who otherwise would be considered quote unquote normal, but they're experiencing a great deal of fatigue, oppression, feeling that they are out of control of their lives, so much happening, even if they're working at home and still have jobs and feeling very lucky for that. I'm wondering if you're seeing now, at this point, after 8 months of COVID and the various, you know, orders that we've had, are you seeing any increase in people expressing rage in communities, fires set, increased domestic violence, which is what we hear from the domestic violence community, and what it is that you think is really going on in those areas with people who may be inside and dealing with a great deal of mental health issues, whether they had them previously or not?
Right, I'm sure. I mean, I've seen it in my own household where my children are very frustrated. I have a younger son who is very athletic, team sports year round. That's how he felt good about himself. It's how he was, you know, as supportive as I am as a parent. That's where he would feel his accolade, right? He would get his great job, and he, for the last 9 months, he hasn't had that, and I can see the effect that it's having on him. He's frustrated. He wants to go to the park. You know, previous to this last update, you know, that was not an option, right? We could go to the beach, but it's not the way that we're used to it, right? Where we can set up and have a nice day. It's kind of, you're in the water and then you're out of the water. So in my own household, I can see the frustrations. And like I said, my household is no different than anyone else's. You know, there is that nationwide trend of increased domestic violence. We haven't seen it yet here, but I would be foolish to think that it's not a concern. So we are trying to track it very closely. We are going to have to pull some data points to see what kind of increases we're having, because just like anything else, it kind of goes like this anyway, where some months are worse than others. But you know, kind of reflecting into my own household, I can definitely see that if an 11-year-old is struggling, I would imagine that could be the same for any age group. And then you add on other factors, right? Like as far as, again, in my own household, where between me and my current girlfriend, is that we've gone to a single income household because for childcare issues, we have young ones. She has young ones that no longer go to school, they homeschool. So now you add on all these factors to a household that maybe is not as stable as mine's in regards to, I've been very blessed to be in a financial situation that going to single income is not, you know, it's not detrimental. It's tough. I mean, you know, there's no CPK Uber Eats anymore, but, you know, we're going to have to kind of dial it down, but we're going to be fine. That may not be true for a lot of other households. And I would imagine that that can create a lot of stress. I think one of the leading factors in divorce and domestic violence is financial issues. I believe it's one of the leading causes besides adultery. So if you have all of these people that are losing their jobs, frustration of unemployment benefits not being paid, yeah, you can definitely create that unfortunate storm where you would see an increase in domestic violence. You would see an increase in poor decision makings within a household. Fortunately, we haven't seen a dramatic increase here. But again, to think that it can happen would be foolish.
When we talk to the Domestic Violence Action Center and Nancy Creedman, I mean, one of the things that she says is that because this is inside and people aren't seeing it, and people are now with their intimate partners who may also be the ones who are hurting them, that these are things that are not being charted. They're not being tracked in any sort of way until something happens. Same thing with children, that children who are in dangerous situations or high risk situations, because they're not at school and there aren't other eyes on them, that they are also in risky environments at home or maybe out on the street. Do you have any way of being able to track this from what you're doing in your lane, given the mental health focus that you have? And what would you like to see so that we could have better intel about what's really happening with our kids and with our adults who may be in very dangerous and risky situations at home?
Right, so it's very challenging, and yeah, Nancy has a lot of good points in regards to that type of fear. And it's one of those where it's really hard to say if it's not or not happening, and that's the real issue, right? Is if it is happening, that's a problem. If it's not happening, then it's not a problem. But I will say that in regards to people being home, and because of the way that Honolulu is set up, where if my neighbor is only about 15 feet away, and it's one of those where since everybody is home, if that was an issue, we would hear it. You get what I mean? So it's one of those where, yes, we're trapped at home, but everybody's trapped at home. So, it's tough. It's tough to say. I haven't heard my neighbors screaming unless, but they always say, right, if my neighbors are quiet, then maybe I'm the loud one. But, but it's tough. And I think the way to improve that, I think with social media, it's less and less, or it's more visible. It's less. It's less hidden, because for example, in regards to social media, it's like all of a sudden if somebody stops posting, you're going to call them, right? Versus the old days where you don't know what's going on with somebody, you just think they're fine. So I think that definitely there needs to be more education. I think that there needs to be more support for families during this time. I think that but you could create all of these programs, but will somebody use it? That's the real question. And a lot of times, as you know, anytime that there's a domestic violence, there's a lot of control in the house. So if it's occurring, it's very difficult to say. So we don't have the staff to actually go door to door and, kind of check on how people are doing. But I don't think that it would be a poor initiative if there was availability and funding, in regards to CARES money, which could be used to deal with mental health issues in regards to, COVID created situations, which this is a totally COVID created situation where someone is stuck in home. So I know there's a lot of money on the table, and you pose a very good question as to how do you create a system to flag dangerous situations. And I think that, just me kind of talking off the cuff would be to perhaps support a program where someone goes door to door and just, hey, we got services, if you guys are having a hard time, this, that, or whatever. But as far as the police department goes, is that we're very limited in regard to kind of knocking unannounced, only because if we find something that we shouldn't see, it leads to that whole the challenge of discovery in regards to criminal law. So that's where it gets challenging. And that's actually one of the challenges I've had in my initiatives, is that when our officers are walking up to someone to offer services, is that a legal encounter, right? And basically we found was that it has to be consensual. So, moving forward, to answer your question and to stay on track, I do believe there needs to be better ways and it would have to be a non-law enforcement entity to carry that out, to go ahead and try to explore. Of course, you would have a conduit to law enforcement, but it would be managed by law enforcement.
But because HPD is often the gatekeeper for all of this, how would you ask other people to engage in the well-being of others without feeling that they're being snoopy? Or are we saying it's okay to be snoopy because we are in extraordinary times, and extraordinary times can truly change people? And then, therefore, do we all have to respond very differently and be able to call HPD and say, I think something's happening, or I've heard my neighbors, shouting each other periodically, without it just being a nuisance call, but to really say, I think there may be something going on there. Do you think that, or are you asking, in the absence of a program to do something like this, that people be willing to risk it and make a call and check on the people around them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think both ways. That, yeah, I would advocate for definitely some type of short-term program to help identify some of the issues that you brought up. But I think that as a neighborhood, we should always be snoopy. We should always be caring for our neighbors, because I don't know how many times we've got to a scene in time, meaning that it was only verbal.
Right.
And I think that had the neighbors not called, I've personally been in situations where I truly believe, had we not been called, that something bad would have happened. They were that close. So I always encourage, and I think all of our officers encourage, anyone who thinks that something's going on, it's their duty to report. I mean, I don't know how many times where we've had these very tragic abuse cases, and then you'll see the neighbors come out, and then, they'll be on social media or the news and say, we kind of wish we said something. So instead of living with that regret, just call. Let us deal with it. What we always try to encourage is, if you call 911, it actually empowers the police department to go knock on that door. Without that call, we really don't have much legal right to just go door to door. And, we'd like to check on your status and talk to your wife and kids. That would be a huge legal battle in regards to search and seizure and what we discovered in that encounter. But as a neighborhood, if you call it, I have every legal right to go check on it, because your neighbor said, which they can remain anonymous. You don't have to say, Mike Lambert is calling in on my neighbor next door. You can say, we got an anonymous call of shouting. And that empowers the police department to knock on that door and ask questions. So I definitely would encourage anyone who hears this to encourage people to call 911. It really empowers the police department to take action. And a lot of times we're not mind readers, and anybody would know their neighborhood better than us. In regards to like my own neighborhood, luckily I live in a very good neighborhood now. But, in previous, when I lived in other locations, I knew which house was the yellers, and it always was concerning. I'll whistle blow on myself and say there were a couple of times that I called it in because I wasn't comfortable with the level of argument that was occurring in that household. And, who knows, right? Maybe I saved someone from getting hurt, right? Just by making that call. So I would encourage anyone to make that call if they feel that something's going on, or if you see the kids, I think that if you see the kids kind of sheltered or bruised, yeah, call it in. Let us look at it. Let us take a peek. Even if it seems silly, like, oh, the kids, they don't come outside anymore. We're concerned. That's good enough for us. We can go check. People are concerned. I guess there's kids in the house and they're not seeing them. We just want to do a welfare check. There's these little phone calls that actually go a long way to empower the police department to look.
Let's talk about the inverse of that for a second, because not that long ago, we had the case in Diamond Head where officers did turn up, and that ended up being the last day of their lives. And clearly there was a mental health issue there. Clearly there were issues of who knew that there were firearms there, but just the conflagration that caused. What has been the internal response since then to that, now that it's moved off the minds of a lot of people, but it's certainly very much on the minds of those in HPD, as now they're approaching a home, or as you're asking people to call it in and they would be knocking on doors. I know HPD officers know what they sign up for when they sign up for it, but how has that translated into maybe a different way of approaching a knocked door knowing what we know after what happened at Diamond Head.
Right, Diamond Head was very tragic, and I think that it's an even bigger tragedy that it was overshadowed by the pandemic. Right after that tragedy, there was a lot of legislation. We're still in session to push for mental health laws and to push for actually firearm laws that could potentially save another Diamond Head incident from occurring. It's unfortunately derailed by COVID. I hope that the steam is not lost and it's just been shelved into this next leg session, and we can go ahead and move forward with having the ability for officers to initiate a mental health evaluation um, without the use of a third party. I think that there needs to be a little more regulation on how guns are transferred, when someone passes away, and to make sure that those guns are accounted for. Because in that situation, those guns were owned by the deceased husband of the female who was murdered in that incident, and after a while, it falls out of the system, and that's a very dangerous precedent to have, to where if those guns aren't responsibly transferred during probate or whatever situation, that they just basically float around our island. Very, very concerning. And that's basically what happened in that situation, is that our records didn't even show that because of the way that the system was currently made. I think he, don't quote me on the dates, but I think he had been deceased for over 10 years. And, I guess it was obviously a ticking time bomb. What it has changed internally is that there has been a increase in tactical training for that situation. But I will say that that situation was so, how can I say that? It was almost unavoidable in the moment, because that individual had decided that whoever came to my door was going to die. And, in our profession, that's a reality that we all face. And I think that when KK and Tiff were killed, I think that it was a grim reminder, again, of what you said earlier, is what we signed up for. And it went from, okay, we're not LA or Chicago or New York, to, well, even Hawaii, you can get killed at a doorstep. So it was a very grim reminder of what we do and the type of sacrifices our men and women make every day. And what I'm hoping for is, in this next leg session, that it's not lost because of the impact of COVID. I really hope that we move forward in tightening up we have very strict laws. I don't, in regards to firearms, I'm not advocating for us to take away anyone's right to own. All I want is an increased accountability for transferring of weapons, and for individuals who have passed away, and for probate to better track where those weapons end up. For example, I should pass, and what happens to my firearms.
Throughout this conversation, we've been looking at various threads of mental health in the homeless population, certainly those who are dealing with mental health conditions, looking at what's happening inside of HPD for a lot of reasons. As you see us moving forward, what do you think some of the greater lessons will be of this time for how the public and HPD interact and move through whatever may come next with COVID? Because certainly we don't have a vaccine, and we don't know really when all of this will end, especially if people start feeling frustrated and gathering again, and we have a great deal of transmission. But what would be those really good silver linings to end on a happy note here? What would they be that you would like to see carried forward in the way the public and HPD interact, and what HPD is able to do for the public?
That's a great question. So for me, what I want to see move forward is that even in our programs, because what happened is that the whole new project, which you touched upon in the introduction, was just a very small, 20 people overnight type of project, and the post is upwards of 150 to 200. And what we've learned is that if you give people a little bit of time to decide, they make a lot better choices. So for example, the Honu project, you had to choose 2 shelters upon entry. So that was one of the acceptance standards, is that we'll take you in overnight, but you have to choose 2 of wherever Next Step, IHS, and once they become available, then you would transition out. And that was a part of a condition for them to come in. What we found with posts is that if you give them a few days, their choices are a lot more in depth and they stick more, which means we have less recidivism. Because what we found in the Honu is we're telling them choose. Oh, okay, I'll pick A or B, and then they go to A or B. It's not a good fit, right? So they cycle right back into homelessness, and we start back over. What we found at the post, because we had more time, because some of the shelters weren't comfortable with taking them right off the street. They wanted a slight observation period at the post before being comfortable with transitioning to their facility for good reason. We found that they said, you know what, explain to me that other program again. What was that one? And what we do is we give them more days to choose. And then what we found is when they actually transition to that program, we don't see them again, right? Because they had time to digest, they had time to think about it. So one of the things that we're gonna do is if we move back to, post transitions back to the home, we're gonna actually allow a 10-day period to where someone can come in and, no questions asked, you can shelter, whatever, clean up, start to regain, your humanity. And then we'll go ahead and decide what fits best for you. One of the things that I wanna push, which is gonna be challenging with the economic situation that we're in, is that we definitely need a lot more behavioral health beds. We definitely need a lot more detox beds, because what we found out in the post is that over a quarter of them by day 3 are very, very willing to go to detox or some type of mental health support system. And it's disheartening to say that the ones that left us was because they had to go basically feed the need, and there was an ask prior to that for some type of detox program that's just not available. So I'll share some statistics. So the post since April has helped over 550 people for at least one night. Most of them stay multiple nights, but at least 550 people, individuals, were given at least one night of service. We've been able to place about, I think we have to be at about 215 or over 220 people that are actually placed. And one of the segments of that was to detox services. Now, the disheartening part is that of the 200 people that we couldn't help, I would go out on a limb to say 50 of them, a quarter of them, would have taken a detox service had it been readily available for them. So like I said, I really, really want to push that. I have some data points moving forward for Ledge that are real, because they were asking for it. They said, oh, can we go to detox? Can we go to detox? I'm sorry, I really want to get support. And then they vanished. Any person can figure out what they decided to go do.
Mike, would that be an appropriate use going forward for something like a Kahi Street facility, to where you had beds, people to come and be able to detox, not just to stand it up because of COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and I do believe that those are one of the ideas that were being tossed around prior to us having a resurgence in COVID. I think it was being considered. I hope that it's still on the table. I think that the facility, I've been to the facility myself, I think that it'd be great. The way that it's set up does support, easy security and that type of thing. So I do hope that Kahi Street is repurposed outside of COVID for behavioral health beds. I think that it would fill a huge gap, and I think that that'd be a great start. I think that we need to also identify regional locations for rehabilitation. A lot of people, they want to just be near where they are. And one of the biggest misconceptions is that if you're homeless, you don't belong. That's not true. A lot of people, they tend to gravitate to where they grew up. And if you ask them, right, Waianae Coast, I'm from Kaneohe, and a lot of the people that live in those rural communities, they grew up there, and that's what they're familiar with. Even though they're homeless, they still like to go to Times because that's where they went as a kid. They like to go to LNL, that's where they ate as a kid, and they tend to stay in the area. So I think by having rehabilitation programs in an area that allows them outpatient treatment would really be beneficial. It allows, particularly in areas on the Windward and Leeward Coast, an opportunity for people to fix themselves where they are. And I really hope that we move in that direction. I know it's challenging and it's pie in the sky with the economic restrictions we're having, but I think that it really, really has to be looked at, whether it be federal grant or even if private care providers would find interest in some philanthropy. I think it'd be very beneficial to the community.
Mike, I want to thank you for all the time that we were able to spend together this morning and to wish you all the best. You and the boys are back in the same household now? Are they
Yes,
still
it
with your
has been
parents? Oh,
great
good, good,
for
good.
my
I'm
for my
glad.
own mental health. Yeah,
I
that
think
could be
that was
a
important.
conclusion, but yeah, it's nice to have them home.
Good. Well, I hope you and the boys and your parents and your girlfriend and all of your family, her children too, everyone stays healthy and well and taking very good care of yourselves mentally and physically. And we'll check in with you again sometime in the future. Thanks so much for the time today.
Thanks, Beth. I appreciate it. You have a good morning.
You too. And for those of you who joined us today, thank you so much for being with us. If you have an idea for a future topic or a slice of this conversation that you'd like to hear, let me know. You can email me at Kozlovb, that's Kozlov as in Victor, B as in boy, at sutterhealth.org. Kozlovb at sutterhealth.org. And we'll be really glad to entertain your questions and your ideas. Thanks so much for joining us. I'll see you next week for From Anxiety to Clarity. Aloha.